Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Fresh Outlook. We're just getting acquainted here on the set. We're talking about a very serious issue, however. Sexual assault, it is a horror story, a crime that can haunt a victim for a lifetime. It's hard to prove. It's even harder in some cases to prosecute. Some say incidents like these are rampant nowadays on college campuses. Others say, however, there are other victims, men, falsely accused by women, armed with laws that are just stacked in their favor. Let's say hello to the Fresh Outlook think tank. I am joined by Alain Sanders, Mike Veny, a mental health advocate, and Andrew Miltenberg, an attorney who specializes in campus assault due process. Andrew, I'll start with you. The laws are made for true victims. If you really are raped, it's great that there's a rape shield law. If you really are a victim of domestic violence, it's great that you can go to a judge and get an ex parte order to have that person kept away from you. But when women seek to manipulate these laws and ruin men's lives, as is often the case, those laws that are stacked in the favors of real victims tend to victimize the falsely accused. What say you, sir?
That's absolutely correct, and it's a phenomenon that's unfortunately growing tremendously, and we're seeing a fantastic amount of young men on college campuses whose lives are being ruined completely by allegations of sexual assault.
You represent a man who was literally haunted by a woman who carried around a mattress at Columbia University for a number of years to humiliate this young man. Tell me about that case.
Well, Paul Nungesser, who attended Columbia on a scholarship from Germany, was accused several different times by this woman, Emma Sulkowitz, of sexual assault. He was found not responsible each time. She went to the police. The police found it not to be credible. He was completely exonerated at every level. And then she set out to destroy his life, carrying around a mattress and holding rallies on campus in an attempt to have Columbia throw him off campus.
And even on his graduation day, she walks across stage carrying a mattress with the help of 3 or 4 other people to humiliate him in front of thousands.
Absolutely. It was a real horror, and it's turned out to have had an incredibly devastating effect on his life.
I'm quite sure. We're going to get back to you a little bit more, Andrew. Alan, you are an educator working at a top university here in New Jersey. What are you guys told about campus sex assaults? Is there a protocol or something?
Well, we're not told anything about campus sex assaults other than what the law is. And there was a last term, I should say, last year, posters went up about what the law is and about what proper sexual relations should be. These are posters that and information that anybody would find inoffensive, just this is the way it is. And there's an ongoing effort on campus. Now, I'm not an administrator, so I can't speak for the administration, but colleges take this seriously. I mean, sexual assault is a serious violation of personhood. The problem with it, of course, is that usually the situation boils down at the end to a he said, she said kind of situation. I don't know what my administration thinks at my university, but personally I would suggest that because schools are caught in the middle, and they are often both the prosecutor and the judge, that is to say they conduct the inquiry and then they must make a judgment, it would actually be better if schools were left out of it, because sometimes schools are accused of wrongdoing themselves. So it would make a lot more sense, for instance, if there was an outside arbitration kind of setup. Every school is located in a community where there are lawyers who are willing to be arbitrators and who can look at the facts and determine what happened as best as they can, and you get the university and the university's reputation out of it. You get down to the business of what can we determine actually happened.
Mike, you and I were talking about this a little bit, that perhaps instead of the school investigating it, all of these allegations should be investigated by the police, who are properly trained, who have a protocol. Tell me more what your thoughts are.
Well, absolutely. Sexual assault is a big problem. And so let's not minimize that. It's a real big problem. At the same time, a lot of universities are playing the role of police, and that's a problem too. It should be left to the police. A university or a college is a business, and there's pressure from donors and people who give them money. And if people find out that someone was accused on campus, you've got parents calling, and it's a real big problem for that person who's accused until proven guilty. And that's why I really believe it should be done through the police. The other thing that campuses need to do better is have a more thorough process for dealing with someone who does report something to make sure everything is followed through.
And that's one of the, what Mike just said is incredibly important. First of all, campuses and the faculty and administration are very good at running a school, a university. They're very well versed in teaching. They're not prepared, they're not trained to investigate what is a oftentimes very complex set of facts that have to be deconstructed. It is a he said, she said. And what that leads to is a situation where you need real investigation by real trained investigators, by people who are experienced at these types of situations, and the process, as Mike said, is non-existent for a young man to defend himself from this.
Is this an outgrowth of hostile feminism where men are portrayed as brutes and predators, and that feeling on campus is brought into the system where men are treated unduly harsh, where there's a presumption of guilt, where there's a presumption of innocence on the part of the woman who claims to be attacked?
That seems to be very much what's happening.
No, I wouldn't go there. I don't think that's
Well,
right.
there's a huge movement on campus called He for She, where they want to turn away from traditional feminism because they feel it's too anti-male.
But we're getting into politically correct terminology here. The facts of the matter is that rape and sexual assault on campus, as anywhere in the United States, is a serious problem. And we shouldn't sweep it under the rug because some people have been falsely or unfairly accused. It's a huge problem. The question is how to deal with that fairly. I think I agree with my colleagues on the panel that schools are not well set up to deal with this sort of problem. It is better to basically farm it out. Now, it can lead, if a crime has been committed, then clearly the allegations of a crime are to be investigated by the police and the criminal justice system. If it doesn't rise to the level of a crime, the appropriate thing, in my view, would be to farm it out. That is to say, to have an arbitrator, somebody who is not part of the administration, who is not a lawyer for either side in the dispute, and determine as best he or she can what actually happened.
Let me get Mike and then I'm going to get you in.
The other thing I want to say is schools can do a better job of communicating their policies around this to parents, to families, so everyone is clear with where the school stands on it, and also do a better job of educating the students about what's appropriate and not appropriate. A lot of young people today don't have appropriate boundaries. You know, we are in a day and age of hookups, you know, and people now hook up with someone and regret it, and it becomes a...
As they call it on SVU, they call it buyer's remorse.
They do call that SVU.
Let me just ask you this.
Sure.
What can a young man on campus do to keep himself safe? Because if the woman's intoxicated, she's not able to give consent, but most people will tell you there are a few hookups where alcohol is not involved. So right there you have a problem.
Absolutely, and Mike just said there is a hookup culture right now, and the things I'm seeing on campus are that it's a very freewheeling sexual environment. What would I tell a young man? Well, I'll tell you what I tell my son, who's going to be going to college next year. He really has to be incredibly careful of who he ends up alone in a room with and under what circumstances, and even then, I'm not sure he will be safe from allegations. And I also have 2 daughters. And so I do worry about them because, as Alan said, sexual assault is a very real problem. But defending someone from false allegations also has to be something that the school gives thought to.
Exactly, and you have to look no further than the Duke lacrosse case, where a group of young men were disparaged by the leaders of this country, and it turned out they were innocent.
That's right, and that's why we should have appropriate due process procedures.
Alan, let me ask you this. Is there some lesson or some course or some instruction that young men and young women should be given before they go to college so they know what they're dealing with? Because as Andrew just pointed out and Mike pointed, these are uncharted waters.
Sure. Well, look, you're also asking schools to be something like parents patriae, to be parents to children, because many of them really are children in the way they think, although they may be adults. You're asking universities to be surrogate parents. The instruction has to come from the home. The instruction has to come from the faith-based communities where students come from. Universities' duties is to simply tell them what the law is and what the responsibilities of adulthood are. Universities cannot be surrogate parents for children. That is the duty of parents. Now, what universities can do is to apply rules fairly, and when they're not in a position to do that, then to farm it out to arbitration or to the criminal
I got a
justice
big
system.
reaction out of Andrew. Let me
Well,
get Andrew.
here's a little bit of the problem. The problem is that alcohol is everywhere to be found on campuses. And while you may have the ability to parent children well while they're growing up, you now have young people who 3, 6, 8 months before had a curfew, were living in their parents' home, who are now living in a dorm. There's alcohol to be found, there's partying going on, there's this hookup culture, and I think schools do have a greater responsibility to do something to teach these young people. You can't just expect these people are not equipped at 18 and 19 for their first time away from home to handle what's being thrown at them.
Also, you know, if somebody has a real concern, there are different types of living situation where students can live. I know I'm an old timer, but when I used to go to a girl's dorm, we would sign in and the young lady would have to leave the room and come down and meet me in the hallway. She'd have to be back at her room by 11 p.m. There were rules. That was the College of New Rochelle back in the 1980s. So there is a way to police this, but what Andrew makes a good point. If the schools are taking this seriously, Mike, enforce anti-alcohol laws. They know keg parties are happening. Stop it. What say you? And I'll get you, Alan.
You can't really enforce that. And again, I'm going to agree with what he said there. It's not the school's job to be a parent. At the same time, it's not the workplace's job to parent sexual harassment, but it happens, and we have to educate employees about that. So we should also just educate and remind. It's good to remind and have reminders about what's appropriate, what is not appropriate. But we live in a day and age now where you can have a texting conversation you see with someone, and she invites, me to her room. I'm a college student. And I go hook up with her. Everything's pretty clear on the text. Right. She says, "Bring a condom."
Right.
And we hook up, and the next thing that happens is she regrets it, which
right.
I'm sure has happened at some point in my life with the hookups I've had.
But Alan, before you go on, I have a dozen cases just like that.
Right. What you would think there is compelling evidence that this was not a crime, yet these people are persecuted and prosecuted as if a crime took place.
But look, schools take their responsibilities seriously. My university and all universities that I know take their responsibilities seriously. They are educating institutions. They educate. They educate students about the law. They educate students about what is appropriate responsibility. But they are not the police, they are not law enforcement, and they are not judges. That's the problem, okay? Now, what we can do about that is to tell, and you mentioned some of the laws. I mean, alcohol. Well, that's a problem of the general political environment. You can drink at 18. It's legal to drink at 18. Now, what is a school supposed to do with that? It has to abide by the law. So the school is not in a position to regulate the entire political environment. All it can do is tell people this is the situation, and then, of course, you have to allow people to make their own judgments and to make their own decisions. If they make the wrong decisions, that's not the responsibility of the school.
Right, but what Andrew's saying, and I think it's very compelling, is that these young men will have explicit conversations with these women. These women will willingly go back to their dorm rooms. They will engage in sexual conduct, and then they later regret it, and these young men are prosecuted
Well,
for it.
and I have to tell you that the way the process at most schools, and I don't know yours, unfolds is it's a very vague process. There's no uniformity from school to school. I've been involved with schools that there's no uniformity within the school in the same semester as how the process unfolds. There's very little opportunity for the young man to tell his story. They're frequently hit with a 100-page investigative report a day or two before hearing. They can't confront their accuser. They can't confront witnesses. And it's everything that we know in our criminal justice system we wouldn't allow. But yet it's happening on campuses, and the stigma that attaches to a young man after a suspension or an expulsion is one that he will carry with him for the rest of his life and will impact his ability to go to graduate school, to get a job in law enforcement or government or anywhere that a background check is required. And right now, the schools are not protecting the rights of the accused.
We got to wrap because that's all the time we have.
Because
but
the
I'll give you
system
final
should
thought.
put it into somebody else's hands. Schools are not equipped to do that. They are educational institutions. They are not judicial institutions.
I agree. Absolutely. Final word, Mike?
We have to educate ourselves with appropriate boundaries and start to be clear, much more clear with what we're doing about this issue.
Okay, Mike, Alan, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. When we come back, we're going to get a little bit later. We're going to talk about Hollywood's big night, the Oscars, a look at the winners and losers after this.